was a regular evening, or so I thought. After a long day at work, I was looking forward to a peaceful night with my family. The thought of unwinding at home, catching up with my wife, and maybe sharing a quiet dinner seemed perfect after the stressful week I'd had. Little did I know this night would end up changing everything. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the silence over the phone earlier, or maybe the subtle distance I had been noticing between my wife and me for the past few weeks. I brushed it off as stress and tried to focus on the familiar comfort of my own home. But when I opened the door, something was different. There was a strange energy in the air. The lights were dimmed, and I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. My heart skipped a beat as I walked closer. I didn't expect what I would find next. There, sitting at the kitchen table, was my wife, on her boss's lap, laughing and whispering in his ear. I froze, not believing what I was seeing. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the stomach, but before I could react, her boss turned to face me. With a smirk, he said something that made my blood run cold. "Your wife is getting a promotion to provide for your family," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You need to let her come with me on vacations from now on." I couldn't believe my ears. Was this really happening? Was my wife, the woman I had trusted and loved, so brazenly flaunting her affair right in front of me? Then, without even a shred of guilt, my wife added, "Yes, if not, I'm not your wife anymore." In that instant, everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my life came crashing down. The words they spoke echoed in my head as if they were a cruel, taunting reminder of how deeply I had been deceived. My wife, the woman I had stood by through thick and thin, the woman I had trusted with everything, our home, our family, my heart, had just made a mockery of that trust. And her boss, sitting there like it was no big deal, had no shame. It was as if they were both on some twisted vacation of their own, one that had been happening right under my nose for who knows how long. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my fists clenching involuntarily. I couldn't process what I was seeing or hearing, but something deep within me snapped. I had always been a calm person, someone who avoided confrontation, but this was too much. "Get out of my house!" I yelled, my voice filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. My wife didn't flinch. Instead, she looked up at me with that same smirk, one that made my blood boil. "You heard him," she said coldly, nodding at her boss. "This is my life now." I could barely breathe, my chest tightening as the shock and anger mingled into something darker. How had we gotten here? Where had my wife gone? Who was this stranger in front of me, sitting on my kitchen table like she didn't care about the life we had built together? But before I could say anything more, my stepsister, who had been standing quietly in the corner, suddenly stepped in between us, blocking my path. "Wait," she said, trying to keep things from escalating. Her interference only made things worse. I didn't have time for her or anyone else's nonsense. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and I was done trying to play the role of the understanding husband. I had to stand up for myself. For once, I wasn't going to be the nice guy who just let everything slide. "You're too late," I muttered, through gritted teeth, my voice trembling with fury. "I've had enough of this." And with that, I stormed past my stepsister, my heart pounding in my chest. The betrayal felt like a weight on my shoulders, and I couldn't breathe as I turned to face my wife one last time. She didn't even look sorry. Instead, she looked relieved, as though everything had been a part of her plan all along. As I stood there, my mind racing, a sense of disbelief still clung to me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated betrayal, and I needed to understand how deep it ran. My emotions were like a storm inside me, anger, hurt, and confusion all colliding in one overwhelming rush. But one thing was clear, I was done being played for a fool. I couldn't get the words out of my head. "You need to let her come with me on vacations." My wife had openly accepted this arrangement. She wasn't just having an affair, she was choosing this man over me. And as if that wasn't enough, she had openly admitted that her boss was giving her promotions because of it. My mind was spinning, and I needed to know everything. I turned to face my wife, my voice now low but full of raw emotion. "How long, Jess?" I asked, using her name as if I was talking to a stranger. "How long have you been doing this, behind my back, without a care in the world?" She didn't even flinch. She just met my eyes almost too calmly, as if this was all perfectly normal to her. "It's been months," she finally admitted, her voice flat. "We've been seeing each other for a long time. You've never noticed, have you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Months? This wasn't some fleeting mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a full-fledged relationship, hidden in plain sight, and I had been blind to it. My heart sank, but I couldn't let her see how deeply she had wounded me. But the most painful part? She wasn't even ashamed. I looked over at my stepsister, who had been watching this unfold with wide eyes. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked her, my voice cracking slightly. "You've known about this the whole time?" She hesitated, her gaze shifting nervously between me and my wife. Finally, she nodded. "I didn't want to get involved," she said softly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "But I guess I knew something wasn't right." Something wasn't right? I almost laughed bitterly, but it didn't feel like laughter. I was furious, and more than that, I was crushed. My own family, my own wife, had betrayed me in the most humiliating way possible. "Get out," I said, my voice trembling with anger now. "Both of you. Just leave." I had no idea where I was going to go from here, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in this house with these people any longer. I was done pretending. As my wife and stepsister walked out, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the lies, the manipulation, and the utter disrespect they had shown me. I had been nothing more than a convenience, and now I was done being her fool. The silence in the house after they left was suffocating. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what I had just learned. My wife's betrayal was enough to destroy any semblance of trust I had in her. But there was more. Something darker that I hadn't anticipated. I thought my stepsister had simply been an innocent bystander, unsure of what was happening, but not wanting to interfere. She had always seemed like a passive observer in our family dynamics, so I had never suspected she could be part of the web of lies my wife had spun. But now, the more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't add up. How long had she known about the affair? How much had she kept from me? As I sat there, my mind still racing, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my heart dropped. It was a video. A video of my wife and my stepsister both laughing, drinking, and, shockingly, my stepsister was there with my wife's boss, sitting on his lap, exactly as my wife had been earlier. My blood turned cold as I watched the video. It was clear that this had been an arrangement, something they had been doing together without my knowledge. I watched as my wife's boss leaned in and whispered something into my stepsister's ear, his hands lingering on her as if they were lovers. And then the words I never thought I'd hear. "You two are good together. You'll do anything for the promotion, won't you?" I watched, horrified, as my stepsister nodded, her face flushed with excitement. And that's when the full weight of the betrayal hit me. This wasn't just an affair. This was a scheme, a coordinated effort between my wife, my stepsister, and her boss, one that had been playing out for months, if not longer. It was all about power, money, and control, and I had been the pawn in their twisted game. Tears of anger burned behind my eyes. My wife had used my stepsister as an accessory to her betrayal, getting her involved with her boss so they could both enjoy the luxuries of power and wealth, while I was left in the dark. I couldn't believe it. I had trusted these people, opened my heart to them, and this was how they repaid me. I could hear my stepsister's voice in my mind as she tried to justify her actions. I didn't know how else to get ahead. He promised me things, but there was no excuse. No matter how much she tried to spin it, she had crossed a line. My family had been used to manipulate me, and now it was all crashing down around me. I wasn't just betrayed by my wife. I was betrayed by my own flesh and blood, someone who had been pretending to be a supportive sibling. I didn't know how to process it. The rage inside me was overwhelming, but at the same time, I felt hollow, like I had just witnessed my entire world crumble. I had been so blind to the people I trusted most, and now it was too late. I needed to confront them. I needed to make them face the consequences of their actions. The anger inside me was boiling over. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat there watching the video again. Every second of it, every piece of the puzzle fell into place. I wasn't just betrayed by my wife. My stepsister, the one person I thought I could trust, had been involved all along. My thoughts were racing. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let them get away with this. They needed to face the consequences, and I was going to make sure they did. I knew the first thing I had to do was confront them, force them to admit the full extent of their betrayal. I was done being the passive victim in this sick drama. I was going to expose everything. I called my stepsister first. My voice was steady, but beneath it, I could feel the tension tightening in my body. She picked up after the first ring, clearly surprised. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice a little too calm, almost like she was trying to act unaffected. "Come home. Now. We need to talk," I said, trying to control the fury that threatened to spill over. I didn't wait for her to reply before hanging up. The silence in the house was now deafening. As I waited for her arrival, I thought about what I was going to say. I couldn't let them manipulate me any longer. I had to stand my ground and make them understand how much they had hurt me. The doorbell rang soon after, and I felt the pit of my stomach drop. My stepsister walked in, her usual confident expression replaced with one of unease. "What's this about?" she asked, clearly sensing the seriousness in the air. "Sit down," I ordered, my voice unwavering. "We need to talk." She hesitated, but eventually took a seat, her eyes avoiding mine. I took a deep breath, knowing what I had to do next. "I know everything," I said, locking eyes with her. "I saw the video. You and my wife's boss. Together." Her face turned pale as she realized I wasn't bluffing. What do you mean?" she stammered, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She knew she was caught. "I know you've been a part of this entire scheme," I continued, my voice now rising. "You've been helping my wife cheat on me with her boss, and you've been using me for whatever you could get. You've been lying to me all this time. How could you do this to me?" She stood up quickly, panic in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do. I wanted a better life. I didn't think it would go this far." But her words felt empty, justifications for her actions. There was no remorse in her tone, just fear. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. "You ruined everything," I said, my voice low but filled with disgust. "You and my wife have made a mockery of me, of this family. I trusted both of you. And you used me for your own gain." Before she could respond, I turned to my wife, who had been standing in the doorway, watching the confrontation unfold. "You too," I said, my eyes locking onto her. "I want you to understand this clearly. You have no place here anymore." She stepped into the room, her expression one of defiance, but there was something else in her eyes. Fear. "I'm sorry," she said weakly, though it didn't feel like a real apology. I never meant for it to get this far, but you don't understand. He promised me a better future. I was just trying to give us more, a better life for all of us. I laughed bitterly. A better life? By betraying me? By destroying everything we had? It was then that the weight of the situation really sank in. This wasn't just a fight. It wasn't just an affair. This was the end of everything I had known. My marriage, my trust, and the family I thought I could rely on. I stood up, my fists clenched, my mind made up. I want you both out. Now. I didn't care where they went. I didn't care about their excuses. This was the moment where I took control. My wife tried to plead with me, but I wasn't having it. I had been patient long enough, and now it was time to end this. Pack your things and leave, I said, and don't come back. As I stood there, watching the two women who had betrayed me, something inside me snapped. The years of loyalty, the trust I had placed in them, all felt like a joke now. But I wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. I had spent so much of my life being passive, thinking that everything would work itself out. Not anymore. The first part of my plan was simple. My stepsister had to face the consequences of her actions. She had been just as involved in this as my wife, manipulating situations, all the while pretending to be part of my family. There was no way I would allow her to walk away without paying for her role in this betrayal. I turned to my stepsister, who was still standing there in silence, clearly shocked by the confrontation. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but there was also something else. Fear. She knew what was coming next. "You've ruined everything," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You've broken this family, but you won't get away with it. You're going to marry him. I want you gone. Immediately." She flinched at my words. "What? What do you mean? You want me to marry him? Are you serious?" "Yes," I responded with a finality that brooked no argument. "You're going to marry your lover, the boss, and leave this house. I will not have someone like you under my roof anymore." Her eyes widened, and I could see her trying to think of a way out of this, but it was clear that there was no escape. She had betrayed me, and now she had to deal with the consequences of her actions. My thoughts turned to my wife. As much as I wanted to throw her out and be done with it, I knew there was more to be done. She wasn't going to get off easy. I had endured her infidelity for far too long. It was time for her to feel the weight of what she had done. And there was one thing that would hurt her the most: divorce. But I wasn't going to stop there. I would make sure that this experience would destroy her, just as she had tried to destroy me. I pulled out my phone, texted my lawyer, and set the wheels of the divorce process in motion. The paperwork would be ready within the next few hours, and I planned to serve her with the papers as soon as possible. "I'm filing for divorce," I said to her, making sure she understood the gravity of what I was saying. "And you will not be getting a penny from me. Everything we built, every piece of this life we had, it's over. You'll leave with nothing." She looked at me, her face full of anger and disbelief. "You can't do this," she protested. "You'll regret this." "I swear." But I was already done. There was no regret in me anymore. Only the feeling of being free from the chains that had bound me to a deceitful woman. I turned my attention back to my stepsister, who was now looking at me nervously. "You don't get to stay here," I told her. "You're marrying him and you're leaving my life forever. This is your punishment for everything you've done." Her hands trembled as she nodded, realizing that she had no other option. "Fine, I'll marry him, but you'll regret this too." I didn't care about her threats anymore. I didn't care about anything she said. This was my moment, my revenge, and it was going to be painful for both of them. The following days were a blur of legal proceedings, phone calls with lawyers, and intense emotions that I was only beginning to process. I had made it clear to both my wife and stepsister they had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The divorce papers were served to my wife, and though she tried to fight it, she knew the battle was over. She had once been my partner, the woman I trusted, the mother of my children. But now, she was nothing more than a stranger who had betrayed me, who had played me for a fool. And my stepsister, her involvement in the affair made everything worse. She had used me, manipulated my kindness, and was now going to marry the man who had helped ruin my life. But what hurt more was the fact that she never even seemed to regret it. As the divorce process continued, I found myself reflecting on what I had endured. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. No more lies. No more pretending. Everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I had felt trapped in a relationship built on deception and betrayal. But now I had the chance to rebuild my life, my peace. However, it wasn't just the divorce that I had to deal with. I had children to think about. They were the only thing that mattered now. My son had been instrumental in helping me see the truth, and I made sure to sit down with him, thanking him for his courage and strength. He had stood by me through the worst of it, and I promised him that our family would heal, no matter what. But there was one final thing I needed to do: the revenge. I knew my wife's lover was still out there, living his life without facing the full consequences of his actions. He had ruined my marriage, played with my family, and left us in chaos. It was time for him to face the truth, and I had a plan for that. I contacted the HR department at his company, making sure that the truth about his affair with my wife would be known by everyone. It wasn't just about destroying his reputation. It was about making sure that the damage he had caused wasn't swept under the rug. He needed to understand the pain he had caused, and I was going to ensure that everyone knew about his role in breaking up my family. As I made the phone call and organized everything, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. What he had done to me and my family was unforgivable, and now he would pay the price. The last few weeks had been tumultuous, filled with emotional highs and lows. But through it all, I had come to understand something important. I was stronger than I had ever known. Despite everything I had gone through, despite the betrayal, the heartache, and the anger, I was still standing. And now I was moving forward. The divorce was final. My stepsister had married her boss and was no longer part of my life. I had reclaimed my peace, and while I knew that healing would take time, I was ready to face whatever came next. The past was behind me, and the future was all that mattered now.